Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're stepping into a world of opulent palaces, simmering revolution, and a queen whose name echoes through history, Marie Antoinette.
Ooh, sounds fascinating.
You've sent in excerpts from the Rest is History podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
clearly want to unpack the early years of the French Revolution through her story.
I mean, it's a classic for a reason, right?
We're talking court life at Versailles, the truth behind those rumors and those fateful choices that sealed her destiny.
Yeah, it's a story that never gets old.
Buckle up, because this deep dive is about to get really interesting.
I'm ready.
So what's always intrigued me is how Marie Antoinette becomes this symbol,
Hi.
embodying the anxieties of a nation on the brink of
Yeah,
collapse.
totally. She's not just a queen, she represents an entire system
Right.
teetering on the edge.
It's like she's caught in this perfect storm of circumstance.
Exactly.
But we often forget she starts as Maria Antonia,
Mm-hmm.
this young Austrian princess, thrust into the heart of the French court.
Exactly. This marriage wasn't about love or anything like that.
Right.
It was a strategic alliance between France and Austria, a diplomatic revolution, some historians call it, aimed at reshaping the balance of power in Europe.
But the French people weren't exactly thrilled with this Austrian princess suddenly at the center of their world.
You can say that again. There was deep suspicion right from the start.
Right.
I mean, Austria was seen as the enemy, and that outsider label just clung to Marie Antoinette.
It's like it followed her everywhere.
It did. Throughout her time in France, she's constantly referred to as l'Autrichienne,
Yeah.
sometimes even worse.
Wow, that must have created immense pressure right from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you imagine being a teenager,
Yeah.
married off to a king in a foreign land,
Right.
and instantly labeled a threat?
And then add the pressure cooker of Versailles to the mix.
Oh gosh, yes, Versailles.
We're talking 700 rooms, 2,000 windows, an incredibly rigid court structure.
It's almost unimaginable, the scale of it.
It was the embodiment of absolute monarchy.
Right.
Hierarchy etiquette, constant intrigue.
All of it.
So on one hand, you have this young queen yearning for a simpler life,
Mm.
and on the other, this suffocating world of extravagance and formality.
What a clash. But here's where the picture gets even more complicated.
Mm.
This court obsessed with outward appearances was also a hotbed of scandal and libertinism.
Really?
Oh yeah, particularly under Louis XV.
I see.
The sources even describe how Louis XV was more interested in Marie Antoinette's physical attributes than anything else.
Oh, wow. It's almost unbelievable. That detail about his preoccupation with her breast size really highlights the court's atmosphere
Right.
and his own priorities.
Totally.
No wonder the young, devout Marie Antoinette was repulsed by this environment.
Exactly. And then there's the infamous Madame du Barry,
Yeah,
the king's official mistress,
right.
a former courtesan who held considerable sway over the aging monarch.
So you have these two powerful women navigating a court that was already so full of tension. It was practically a power struggle from day one. These were women with vastly different values and backgrounds.
Yeah, it certainly sets the stage for the challenges Marie Antoinette would face throughout her time as queen.
Absolutely.
But amidst all of this, it's important to remember that she wasn't just a frivolous queen, as she's often portrayed.
Right. That's the one-dimensional image so many people have of her.
You actually found evidence that Marie Antoinette was influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, Rousseau in particular.
Yeah, it seems surprising considering her image, but...
Right, that she would be drawn to these ideas.
I know. Rousseau, the champion of simplicity and individual freedom, seems like an unlikely influence on a queen known for extravagance.
But the sources suggest that his ideas resonated with her.
On a deep level.
So how did this manifest in her life at court?
Well, at the Petit Trianon,
Mm-hmm.
her private retreat within Versailles,
Right.
she created a world apart from the court's formality, embracing a simpler, more natural aesthetic.
It sounds like she was yearning for authenticity.
Yeah.
In a world of artifice, this actually reminds me of her fashion choices.
Oh, yeah.
She ditched those constricting corsets,
Mm-hmm.
embraced looser gowns, and even opted for simpler hairstyles choices that seem revolutionary.
Revolutionary for a queen, right?
For queen.
While these might seem like superficial details, they were
Right.
powerful statements in the context of the rigid French court.
It's like she was trying to carve out a space for herself, to express her individuality within this incredibly restrictive system.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's not forget about the marriage itself.
Right, of course.
What was the dynamic between Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI?
Well, based on the sources, they were fundamentally different people. Their
Real.
personalities were night and day.
Give us the details. What were their personalities like?
Okay, so Marie Antoinette is described as lively, charming,
Okay.
a patron of the arts.
I see.
Louis XVI, on the other hand,
Yeah.
was more introverted, a tinkerer, fascinated by clocks and locks.
So they're practically opposites.
Pretty much.
It's no wonder their relationship became a subject of gossip, particularly with the shocking fact that they didn't consummate their marriage for 7 years. Oh, yeah. That was huge news at the time. It must have been incredibly stressful for both of them.
The pressure to produce an heir was immense, particularly with the future of the monarchy at stake.
So we have a queen who is both adored and vilified, a mismatched royal couple,
Yeah.
and a court riddled with intrigue and excess.
It's like a powder keg waiting to explode.
Sounds like the makings of a revolution, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And the next part of our deep dive will explore the event that throws this powder keg into the fire, the Flight to Varennes.
Oh yes, the Flight to Varennes.
Be sure to stay with us for that.
We'll be right back.
Okay, we're back and ready to dive into one of the most dramatic chapters in Marie Antoinette's story, the Flight to Varennes.
Yeah, talk about a story that captures the imagination.
It reads like a movie plot. A desperate escape under the cover of night disguises secret identities the whole 9 yards. It really does. But before we get swept up in the intrigue,
Right.
it's important to understand why they decided to risk everything in the first place.
Good point. So set the stage for us. It's 1791. The French Revolution is in full swing. What was the situation for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette at this point?
Well, they were essentially prisoners in their own palace.
Right. No more carefree days at Versailles.
Remember the Women's March on Versailles back in 1789?
Oh, yeah. The mob marched on Versailles.
The mob forced the royal family to return to Paris, installing them in the Tuileries Palace under constant surveillance.
Their world had drastically changed.
The sources depict this confinement as a deeply unsettling experience.
Oh.
For both Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they felt isolated, threatened, and increasingly powerless as the revolution spiraled around them.
And they were watching as the revolution became more and more radical, weren't they?
Exactly. The National Assembly was enacting sweeping reforms, stripping away the power of the church, implementing financial changes, and even drafting a new constitution that limited the king's authority, all things Louis VI vehemently opposed.
So he's caught between a rock and a hard place, forced to cooperate with a revolution that undermines everything he believes in.
And Marie Antoinette, with her strong convictions, was even more resistant to these changes. She saw the revolutionaries as a threat to the established order,
Right.
a danger to everything she held dear.
Plus, they had their children to consider.
Of course.
Wouldn't any parent want to escape that chaos and protect their family?
It's a natural instinct, but the sources also suggest that they were out of touch
Really?
with the depth of public sentiment. They seem to underestimate how much public opinion had turned against them.
It's like that infamous let them eat cake line.
Oh, yeah.
Whether she actually said it or not.
Right, right.
It perfectly captures this image of a queen detached from the struggles of her people.
Precisely. And this disconnect played a significant role in the failure of their escape attempt.
So the decision is made to flee Paris. Who was the mastermind behind this daring plan?
Enter Count Axel von Fersen,
Okay.
a Swedish nobleman and close confidant of Marie Antoinette. Some historians even speculate he was her lover.
Oh, wow. He's practically a character straight out of a romance novel.
He certainly fits the bill, a dashing figure orchestrating a risky escape.
So what was the plan?
The plan was to smuggle the royal family out of Paris in disguise, travel by coach to the border, and meet up with loyal troops for protection.
It sounds incredibly risky. They were hardly inconspicuous, were they?
Not at all. The sources describe this grand, custom-built carriage called a berlin.
A Berlin.
Yeah, it was luxurious, spacious, and anything but subtle.
Okay, so maybe not the best choice for a covert escape. But what about the disguises? Surely they went all out on those, right?
Well, Marie Antoinette, her 2 children, and her lady-in-waiting traveled disguised as a family, the Baroness de Corff and her daughters and servants.
Okay.
Louis VI dressed as a valet.
So they were aiming for the ordinary traveler look. But could they actually pull it off?
That's where things start to unravel. They were so accustomed to the privilege and deference of court life that they struggled to shed their aristocratic air. And Louis VI, bless his heart, wasn't exactly a master of disguise.
He wasn't known for his subtle physique or blending in skills, was he?
Not exactly. There were several close calls where they almost gave themselves away.
Oh, no.
Louis XVI striking up conversations with locals, Marie Antoinette's regal bearing betraying her disguise.
It's like they were playing dress-up but hadn't quite grasped the concept of truly blending in.
Exactly. And this lack of awareness would ultimately prove to be their downfall.
So they managed to escape Paris, at least for a while. What happens next?
The journey itself was a series of close calls and near disasters.
I bet.
They were racing against time, knowing that the moment their absence was discovered, the alarm would be raised.
And of course it was right.
Of course. The next morning, panic erupts in Paris when the royal family's empty beds are discovered.
Can you imagine the chaos?
It was absolute mayhem. The National Assembly scrambles to figure out their next move.
Wow.
And messages are sent throughout the country to apprehend the fugitives.
So now they're not just running from their own fears, they're running from the full force of the revolutionary government.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the further they travel, the more mistakes they make.
Like what? Fill us in on those details.
Well, for starters, the escape route chosen by Louis XVI took them through small towns and villages where they were far more likely to be recognized.
He really misjudged the mood of the country, didn't he?
He seemed to believe that outside of Paris, loyalty to the monarchy remained strong. He failed to grasp how deeply the revolutionary spirit had spread throughout France.
Okay, so the tension is mounting. Take us to the moment where it all starts to fall apart.
They had been traveling for hours, changing horses at prearranged relays, narrowly avoiding detection.
But they were starting to run behind schedule.
They were, and the closer they got to the border, the more anxious they became, especially since they still hadn't met up with the military escort meant to protect them.
So they're vulnerable, exhausted, and running out of time. This can't be good.
It wasn't. And then, in a small town called Saint-Menehould, fate intervened in the form of a postmaster named Jean-Baptiste Drouet.
Okay, tell us about this fateful encounter.
Drouet, a former soldier, recognized Louis XVI from his image on the new assignats, the paper money issued by the revolutionary government.
It's one of those small details that changes the course of history.
It really is. Drouet didn't immediately confront them, but he suspected something was amiss. He eluded the local authorities, and as the royal family continued on their journey, the net began to close.
Oh, so they've been spotted. What did they do? Did they try to change course or double back?
They pressed on, hoping to reach the next town, Varennes, before the alarm could be fully raised.
But they were still hours behind schedule, and their military escort was nowhere to be found.
Right, and as they arrived in Varennes, exhausted and desperate, they encountered another obstacle. No fresh horses.
No, so they were stuck.
Completely. And while they were debating what to do, Drouet, who had ridden ahead, arrived in Varennes and rallied the townspeople.
He sounds like a man of action.
He was. And he convinced the local officials to detain the suspicious travelers. Remember, this was a time of heightened paranoia.
Yeah.
Rumors of counter-revolutionary plots were everywhere.
So when this lavish carriage rolls into town with a group of travelers claiming to be servants but acting anything but,
Right.
it was bound to raise suspicions.
Exactly. And so the royal family was escorted to the home of a local grocer where they were held under guard while the authorities tried to verify their identities.
It's an incredible turn of events. The King and Queen of France held captive in a grocer's house.
It was a moment that truly captured the shifting power dynamics of the revolution. The monarchy, once all-powerful, was now at the mercy of ordinary citizens.
What happened next? Did they manage to talk their way out of this predicament?
Unfortunately for them, no. Their fate was sealed when a local judge who had previously been presented at court recognized Louis XVI.
Bring him over.
Essentially. By this point, news of their capture had reached Paris, and the National Assembly sent representatives to escort the royal family back to the capital.
I can only imagine how that journey must have felt. Defeated, humiliated, and surrounded by people who now saw them as enemies. What a stark contrast to the life they once knew.
The sources describe it as a harrowing procession. The crowds were hostile, the mood tense. There was even an incident where a nobleman who tried to defend the king was attacked and killed.
So much for those loyal subjects Louis XVI believed he would find outside of Paris.
The flight to Varennes exposed the deep chasm that now existed between the monarchy and the people.
It's almost as if that one fateful decision to flee sealed their destiny, and to think it might have been different if they had been more discreet or chosen a different path.
Hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it?
Right.
But the consequences of their failed escape were monumental.
Right. Let's talk about those consequences. What happened when they returned to Paris? What did this mean for the revolution and their future?
Well, for starters, the king's authority was completely undermined. Remember that farewell letter he left behind, the one where he basically aired all his grievances with the revolution?
The letter that basically confirmed his opposition to everything the revolution stood for.
That's the one. It was published and read aloud in the National Assembly,
Wow.
and the public was furious. They saw it as proof that the king had been lying to them, that he never truly supported the revolution.
It was the ammunition his enemies needed to turn public opinion fully against him.
Exactly. And Marie Antoinette, already a target of suspicion and resentment, became even more vilified.
She was branded a traitor accused of plotting with Austria to crush the revolution.
Right. The flight to Varennes, in many ways, sealed their fate.
It was a turning point in the revolution. The monarchy was fatally wounded, and the stage was set for more radical changes. But before we delve into the reign of terror and the events that follow, there's another fascinating piece of this story. We need to explore the diamond necklace affair.
Oh, yes. A scandal of epic proportions.
Ooh, tell me more.
We're talking intrigue, deception, forged letters, and a queen caught in a web of deceit. It's a story that truly reveals the underbelly of court life and further tarnished Marie Antoinette's reputation.
That sounds juicy. Let's dive in. Okay, so we're talking about the diamond necklace affair, this intricate web of scandal that further entangled Marie Antoinette. It's the 1780s, and despite her efforts to project this image of simplicity, she's still perceived as this extravagant, out-of-touch queen.
The public image is a powerful thing, and that's what Jeanne de la Motte,
Okay?
a descendant of a disgraced noble family, saw as an opportunity. She basically weaponized this perception of the queen for her own gain.
So she was the mastermind behind this whole scheme.
Yeah.
And what exactly was this diamond necklace everyone was buzzing about?
It was an absolute masterpiece, incredibly valuable. We're talking millions in today's money. Originally commissioned for Madame de Berry, remember her?
Oh, right, Louis the Kiss's mistress.
Exactly. But the king died before she could acquire it.
What happened to the necklace then?
The jewelers were left with this incredibly expensive piece.
Right.
And were desperate to sell it. They even approached Marie Antoinette,
Okay.
but she turned them down. Remember, she was trying to cultivate a more frugal image.
Right, right. But Jeanne de la Motte saw a way to exploit the situation.
She did. She concocted this elaborate plan to convince the jewelers that the queen secretly did want the necklace, but was using an intermediary to keep the purchase under wraps.
Hold on, so they believed her. They thought the queen was involved in this clandestine deal.
They did, and this is where it gets even wilder. Jeanne de la Motte managed to bring a cardinal into the mix, Cardinal Rohan, who had fallen out of favor with the queen. He was desperate to regain her good graces,
Okay.
and Jeanne convinced him that she could make that happen.
So she was playing both sides, manipulating the cardinal and the jewelers. What a cunning plan.
She was a master manipulator. She forged letters from the queen to the cardinal.
Wow.
Even arranged a midnight meeting where a prostitute impersonated Marie Antoinette to seal the deal. It was a performance worthy of the theater.
It's almost unbelievable that she was able to pull this off. So how did this house of cards finally come crashing down?
The jewelers eventually grew impatient waiting for their payment and went directly to the queen demanding their due.
I can only imagine her reaction. She must have been livid.
To say she was furious is an understatement. Marie Antoinette was absolutely horrified and vehemently denied any involvement in the scheme.
But the damage was done, wasn't it? The scandal was already out there.
Oh, absolutely. It exploded across the court and the public.
Wow.
Jeanne de la Motte and her accomplices were arrested and put on trial. The cardinal was ultimately acquitted, but the queen's reputation was irreparably damaged.
It's that classic guilt by association.
Hey.
Even though she was the victim of this elaborate contrivance, the public perception became her reality.
Exactly. The diamond necklace affair became a symbol of everything people thought was wrong with the monarchy. The extravagance, the perceived corruption, the disregard for the people's struggles.
And it played right into those existing revolutionary anxieties, didn't it?
It was like pouring fuel on a fire. The French people were already grappling with economic hardship, food shortages, and growing inequality.
Right.
The scandal just confirmed their worst suspicions about the royal family.
So even though Marie Antoinette had nothing to do with the actual theft of the necklace,
Right.
she became the scapegoat.
She did. It's a stark reminder of the power of perception, how rumors and scandals can shape public opinion even without concrete evidence.
It's a reminder that sometimes perception becomes reality, especially in times of social and political upheaval.
The diamond necklace affair became one of the many threads that contributed to the growing wave of resentment that ultimately led to the French Revolution.
It's fascinating how all these pieces, Marie Antoinette's outsider status, The court's extravagance, those simmering revolutionary tensions, and this explosive scandal all converge at this crucial historical moment.
It really is. And it leaves us with so much to ponder. Was Marie Antoinette truly a villain, a victim of circumstance, or a more complex figure caught in the currents of history? The sources offer glimpses into all these facets of her character.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It challenges us to look beyond those simplified historical narratives and grapple with the complexities of a woman who has become an icon, a myth, and a cautionary tale all rolled into one.
It's a story that continues to resonate with us today. The power of perception, the fragility of power, the allure and danger of scandal, these themes are as relevant now as they were in the 18th century.
And that's the beauty of history, isn't it? It offers us these incredible stories that not only entertain but illuminate the human condition in all its messy complexity.
Absolutely. So the next time you hear someone utter the phrase, "let them eat cake," remember that behind that dismissive statement lies a far more intricate and fascinating story. A story of a queen, a revolution, and a world on the brink of change.
Beautifully said. And that concludes our deep dive into the early years of the French Revolution, seen through the lens of Marie Antoinette's life. We'll be back soon with more deep dives into history's most fascinating figures and events. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and join us for the next adventure. Thanks for listening.